So is that okay, Josie? Can you see those fine?
Yes, perfect.
Great. Brilliant. I was asked to talk very much about the work that we're doing at Manchester and more broadly to diversify and promote equality, diversity and inclusion within research and innovation, practice and culture. And what I want to do before we delve into some of the things that we are doing at Manchester is really emphasise the very strong case for equality, diversity and inclusion, and particularly in research and innovation. So some of you will be persuaded by the fact that it's the moral and right thing to do, the fair thing to do to support a very strong commitment to social responsibility, which drives our work in this area as well. For others, it will be very much a compliance thing. It's a legal requirement. Since 2010 in the UK, we have had the Equality Act, which makes discrimination against any protected groups illegal. And also as a large organisation, we are bound by the public sector equality duty, and we have to report on our gender pay gap annually. But the most persuasive argument for me in the space of research and innovation to really prioritise equality, diversity and inclusion within your work is that diversity drives innovation. And if we limit who can contribute to our fields, then we're going to limit what problems we're able to solve. So I just wanted to connect you with some of that research evidence base that links diversity with research, innovation. So there's a whole host of research out there looking at the diversity dividend, be it gender diversity, ethnicity diversity, geographical diversity, showing that groups with greater diversity can solve problems better and faster than one-dimensional homogeneous research groups. And similarly, if you look at decision-making, diversity will improve decision-making, and this has been shown to impact on research, showing that more diverse teams have that creativity and innovative capacity to really produce higher impact and higher quality research. So these are the real drivers for prioritizing EDI within your work. You might also have seen some of books or TED Talks in this space, and for example, wonderful work of Caroline Criado Perez, and I'd encourage you to read her book, Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. And in this, she presents a range of examples underpinning why the lack of diversity and prioritization of EDI in research and innovation up to this point really has created some problems for us. And she uses examples from medicine, technology, and educational research and innovation. So for example, here on this infographic from the front cover of her book, she's talking about how there's a gap in terms of diagnosis of heart attacks within women, because much of the research has been conducted by men using male examples of classic chest and left arm pain that present when someone's having a heart attack. And so within the medical practitioners and within women themselves and men, there's a lack of understanding of that this isn't actually the way that a heart attack would present within women. And there are so many examples of this throughout research and over the last decade, showing a bias in terms of the solutions that we are bringing to some of the world's most challenging problems. So, you can also probably well aware of some of the race bias in research and innovation. If we look at simple product development, plasters, for example, it's only really very recently that those have been produced for a black skin tone. You might think, well, that's not so serious. But then if you start to look at the field of artificial intelligence, there's well documented racism, for example, in voice recognition and facial recognition. So, for example, Google will report that their speech recognition has 95% accuracy rate, but actually this has been developed using the white male voice. And there are numerous examples of bias coming through in the field of artificial intelligence. So what I want to really promote today is that success hinges on EDI being embedded throughout the research and innovation lifecycle. And you'll be familiar with the research lifecycle, the generation of ideas, the development of your study, evaluation, communication, and then of findings, and adding that to the wealth of literature within your discipline, and so the cycle continues. I just want you to reflect and think about who are the researchers and innovators within your discipline. Do you lack diversity? Who is celebrated and rewarded, and who is influencing the future direction and the problems that are addressed within the field? So again, if you look at who are the researchers and innovators, and there's been research done looking at the most searched for innovators online, for example, which produced this infographic here, people commonly think of role models who are not from a diverse background. And similarly, when we look at awards, some of, for example, the Nobels, again, very well documented, the lack of gender diversity within those highest levels of achievement in research and innovation, the Nobels. And you can see that really it isn't till the turn of the millennium, 2000, that we started to see significant numbers of women coming through and being recognized through this award system. And particularly in medicine, chemistry and physics, they're very low numbers up until this point. The Nobels have really tried to address this and have had diversified the selection panels who are making the judgments on who should be awarded for these highest accolades. And it's great to see people like Emmanuelle Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna coming through and being there as role models for future women in research and innovation. But if we look at the race bias in the Nobels, it's even more stark than the gender lack of women coming through in the past. And there has never been a Black Nobel laureate in science. So we look forward to increased diversity beyond gender within these highest award schemes. But you don't need to just think at the highest level. Look at some of the institutional awards, organizational awards, and national level awards, and question and challenge why the profile is potentially not as diverse as it could be. Similarly, you can look at the geographical reach and start to think about people that you're collaborating with and the research that you're reading about and that's influencing your discipline. If you look at the Nobel laureates over the last 120 years that the award has been in existence, the majority have come from Europe and the US. So, we really aren't either aware or acknowledging and recognizing the amazing work that's going on beyond this Western bias. And, why does any of this really matter? Very few of us are going to get Nobel Prizes, but actually, I particularly like this extract from a senior chemical engineer who's, for her, seeing white men receive the award year after year implicitly indicates that only they can be rewarded for scientific achievement. So it's leading to systemic bias, conscious and unconscious beliefs about what excellence within our disciplines and within research and innovation look like. And, she talks about Alfred Nobel's belief that scientific research should be a force for good in the world. And, so the prize must work towards solving one of our community's greatest challenges, welcoming people who've never had the chance to participate in science. So it's this lack of role models, this you can't be what you can't see, potentially that is meaning that we lack the diversity within our scientific workforce, and predominantly men dominating research positions worldwide. And this real gender stereotype, race stereotype about what excellence looks like and what career choices someone might make really start very early on. So I'd encourage you to go and have a look at the YouTube videos of Redraw the Balance if you're not aware of it already. This is an international study done across many countries, in essentially asking children, primary school age, to draw a picture of what they want to be when they grow up. And even from that really young age, they're very stereotyped in the types of careers that they would choose. You know, think about what comes to your mind when you think of an engineer. Think about what comes to your mind when you think of a pilot or a nurse, for example. You know, as adults, we're very stereotyped by this point, but actually these children were too, from 7 years old. And so people, you know, women and minorities really lack this belief, and also don't meet role models from diverse career sectors, and particularly in research and innovation. So, you know, we're encouraging all researchers at Manchester to take part in our widening participation activity, and we're reaping the benefits of that. So, you know, if you're a PhD student or research staff, get involved in things like the Brilliant Tutoring Programme, going out into schools and really encouraging diverse people to come forward and take the relevant degrees for your discipline. And it is, you know, we are feeding the pipeline in terms of what's happening within the higher education sector. So this is just looking at some UK data, looking at the numbers of women and ethnic minorities. And I apologise for the aggregation of ethnic minorities into Black, Asian and minority ethnic. That's currently the terminology that's used, but we need to look much more granularly and break those groups down. But if we look, we see that actually we have really good diversity in our undergraduate populations. We've got gender parity, 32% of undergraduate at university Manchester are from an ethnic background, which is great to see. And in terms of women coming through to that higher level research, postgraduate research, which is needed in the research, you know, to have that higher level research skill set that's needed, we're doing well. We're actually retaining and keeping that gender parity within our postgraduate community. But actually we are then seeing, starting to see a drop off in terms of ethnic minorities in our PGR community, which we are putting in actions to address. Obviously that's presenting an organisational and sector-wide picture. There'll be differences. There'll be differences in your disciplines, you know, which potentially from the science and engineering disciplines are haven't achieved that gender parity, and there's much more work to do in these areas, for example. But what we see is beyond the postgraduate community, as we start to look at our academic community, our research staff up to professor level, and our lecturers up to professor level, we see a steep loss of diversity. So, you know, this is some national level data from Advance HE, looking at the UK professoriate and the gender and race diversity that exists. And you can see that nearly 70% of the professoriate are white men. We have just under 24% white women. But then when you start to look intersectionally and you look at race and gender together, you can see this steep decline, with only just below 7% of the professoriate being from an ethnic minority and being a man, and then just 2% of the professoriate who are BAME and women. And the same picture is mirrored at the University of Manchester, slightly better than the sector average, but still much more work to do. So, you know, we are looking at our pipeline data at Manchester in great detail, looking to see where the drop off occurs. You can see that it, you know, really starts right from lecturer level, this steep decline in terms of the percentage reaching that highest academic grade. So, you know, we're putting in lots of interventions to try and promote leadership progression for underrepresented groups. And just to say, you know, we're doing the same in terms of our gender pipeline data. We're looking at our ethnicity profile data and breaking it down into the different ethnic groups. And, you know, we are at Manchester, we're very conscious that we only have one Black woman professor, who I actually share my role as academic lead for equality, diversity and inclusion, Professor Dawn Edge. So, you know, we really do have to address this with great urgency. And then when you start to look beyond higher education, research and innovation workforce, and you look more generally across the research and innovation sector, the same drop-off applies. If you look at who are the inventors, who are the women entrepreneurs, for example, just looking at gender equality in this space, you know, they really are in the minority, and there's much more that needs to be done to achieve parity and to celebrate our diverse innovators. So, you know, we're acknowledging our leaky pipeline, we're acknowledging that we need to do something urgently about it. You know, at Manchester, we're working towards the Athena Swan Charter, Principles for Gender Equality, and the Race Equality Charter for race equality. But we're also doing research into why there is this leaky pipeline. You know, why do women and ethnic minorities and disabled, you know, we know the same applies for them, not make it to the highest levels of our organisation. And it is a really complex picture. So we know even at the earliest stage, at the PhD stage, potentially women and minorities don't have the same networks of support and mentorship and advocacy. We know that particularly for women and for people with caring responsibilities, we do see a significant penalty for these people, and they're at risk of leaving the sector. And then beyond that, really just a lack of prospects and opportunities opened up to these people because of that lack of networks. And even for the people that make it to the highest level, you know, being in the minority within those senior leadership teams and decision-making teams, they're isolated and risk exclusion, and their voice not having the same level of attention paid to it as people from the homogenous in-group. So I've been doing research with my undergraduate students, looking specifically and doing qualitative research with women at Manchester, and trying to understand, you know, what are some of these internal barriers that women might have, maybe around trying to confidence and networks, and trying to increase that through leadership programs, mentorship, and increasing visibility of role models. We're also looking at some of the systemic barriers, the barriers that are external to those women, the culture change that needs to happen, both for women and carers, to support flexible working, and to really bring a broader view of academic excellence, so that we recognise it in all forms, because currently, you know, we have that very narrow view. So I'd like to encourage you to start to ask yourself and ask your teams and your colleagues some questions around who are the researchers in your discipline, but also, you know, start to see and ask who's getting funding for research, whose ideas are being supported and promoted, and whose research is being communicated, because you will start to see the systemic bias that's coming through in the system. So there was a UK Parliamentary Select Committee on Racial Inequality in UK scientific community this year, and there was a really powerful presentation both by Dawn Edge, my job share, but also by Professor Rachel Oliver, and you know, she'd done some analysis in engineering, which is her discipline, of success rates, for example, in terms of whose research was being funded and published. And when she looked at both application and success rates, what she was seeing, she compared women and men, she compared white applicants and ethnic minority applicants. And what we know is that women are as successful when they're applying for grants, but they're putting in fewer grants, and they're putting in grants for lower amounts of money. So they ultimately have less research funding to progress their ideas and to grow their group. And when she looked at ethnic minority PIs on grants, again, they had a 25% success rate compared to 33% for white applicants. And, so there's, it doesn't seem that there's much difference there, but that equates to potentially having to write an extra grant every year to reap the same amount of money, maybe to have that extra postdoc, extra researcher within your group. And cumulatively over time, this really creates a significant disadvantage. So a small bit of bias and a small bit of inequality in distribution of funding leads to that significant difference at the highest levels of our organisations. And then she started to look at data, which is all publishable by the research councils, UK Research and Innovation, looking at who was awarding and making the decisions about where the funding should be distributed to. And she was comparing the percentage of ethnic minorities within the population and engineering and physical sciences workforce compared to those that were sitting on various different panels and chairing panels and being part of the review system, and a real underrepresentation and lack of diversity within the peer review system that needs to be addressed. So obviously inclusive participation goes beyond the research workforce, and we need to also be thinking about how we test and evaluate in an inclusive way, and what problems we address and whose needs should be addressed the most urgently. So as well as diversifying our workforce, we should also be considering the evaluation methods that we're using, the people that we're involving, public, patient, stakeholder involvement in our research, and consider the diversity. So I'm a cancer researcher by background, and if you look at the diversity or lack of diversity in terms of testing in cancer research, it is quite staggering, and not something that I really thought about when I was at the bench as a gene therapist, developing novel therapies for solid tumours. But we have this significant bias in terms of the models that we're using for testing that come predominantly, for example, from white derivation, so from white people. And similarly, if we then start to look at genetic analysis based on that, very much skewed in terms of ethnicity. And then when we start to think about clinical trials, the population in terms of participation and testing through clinical trials in cancer research does not mirror the human population, and again is predominantly white, and you can look at gender diversity as well, and there are numerous examples where women have been excluded within cancer research, and even right up to the 1990s, the US Food and Drug Administration had a ban on women of childbearing age in all clinical trials. So it was seen as not safe to test on women. So we really do need to address and think in an inclusive way right through that research and innovation life cycle, as well as diversifying the workforce and adding more diversity into the system. We need to address those systemic biases. And I encourage you to read a Nature paper by Grogan, where she goes into much more detail than I have time to cover, to talk about some of those subtle biases, lack of networks and advocacy and support for women and minorities. And she talks beautifully about how we need to fix the cracks in the pipeline, as well as adding water to it. So I'm going to talk in specific terms now about some of the work we're doing at Manchester, and that I'm specifically leading on. So again, busy slide, but this is actually our own institutional data, where we see the sector-wide issues play out at an organisational level. So we see this loss of diversity through the career pipeline. We see disadvantages in terms of success rates in recruitment and promotion. We see grant disparities internally from our own data, and within our researcher reward and recognition schemes, we also see that bias creeping in. And a lack of confidence as well that then feeds through in terms of researchers perceiving that they will be rewarded and recognised for their work, and that if they report incidences of discrimination, bullying and harassment, then a lack of confidence in that reporting system. This is not unique to Manchester. This is a sector-wide issue in the research and innovation space. So what are we doing? So we're right through the career journey that someone would experience at Manchester. Right from the point of recruitment, we're looking where bias and where we can promote equality, diversity and inclusion through training of people involved in that process, unconscious bias observers and diverse trained recruitment panels. We're also taking more bold steps. We are piloting positive action in recruitment. So where we know we have sustained underrepresentation, we're ring fencing studentships and fellowships, and specifically encouraging applications from those underrepresented groups. We're trying to move to anonymised CVs, which have shown to be more effective in terms of increasing equity in recruitment. And we're also looking at using something called the Rooney-Mansfield rule, where we will shortlist and interview at least 1 in 3 of the shortlisted candidates will have to come from that underrepresented group. And we're doing a lot of work to bust the myth that we are meritocratic institutions and organisations, and that if you work hard, you will be successful and can reach the top, because that just is not true. It's easier for some people versus others. It's easier for people that have that mentorship and support and sponsorship. So we're putting in targeted support as well in terms of advocacy for ethnic minority early career researchers. We've piloted that and we're expanding that beyond biology, medicine and health across the university. We're also putting in targeted grant support and protected time for writing for women and for minorities. And particularly for women and people with caring responsibilities, or people who've returned from 6 months extended leave, which has a significant detrimental impact on their research. We've put in a scheme called the Academic Returners Scheme. So this is where we give them some money to pump prime research activity. We will give them some money to be able to recruit a researcher to help and support them. And we've shown great success with this scheme. It's increased their ability to achieve grant success, to publish, to raise their profile and step up to leadership positions. And as I said earlier, we've got this targeted leadership development. So we are heavily involved with a national women's program called Aurora, and encourage you to look at that. We also have our own internal Women into Leadership program. And we are part of a pilot across the UK, looking to achieve 100 Black women professors within the UK professoriate, and a new programme that's being developed with us in partnership, led by the Women's Higher Education Network. And these programmes are evaluating well and showing impact and really increasing people's confidence and leaving them empowered and supported to advance their career. But I want to pick up one point that came through from evaluation from some of the participants on the leadership programme, really talking about there's no point in just having, talking about these things to women and to minorities. We need to engage everyone. We need to have the whole community, including the men, as allies, and for everyone to take collective responsibility for promoting equality, diversity and inclusion. So this is the big piece of work that we're doing at Manchester now, which is very much trying to engage all leaders and managers, and especially those in the research space, so that we can move much more to collective accountability, to prioritise diversity and inclusion, and really move towards being a fully inclusive organisation with an inclusive culture. So we have a new director and directorate, and I just want to talk about what we're doing in terms of working with our leaders and managers around accountability, and for them to be visible role models for inclusion. So we've created a new University of Manchester leadership framework and a capability tool that allows us to support and assess our leaders and managers' ability to support diverse teams and diverse people. And within this, one of the key attributes is role model for inclusion. And within the slide set, I've posed some questions for you from that you'll be able to reflect on after this talk and think about whether you are a role model for inclusion and what actions you can take to progress in this area. So again, I don't have time to talk it in great detail, but we have just been awarded £500,000 from the Wellcome Trust, and the university is matching that funding with £500,000 of its own money. And we are building on some of the examples that I've talked about, the pilots that we've conducted, and we are expanding those and embedding them in this inclusive research transformation program. So this will look at supporting diverse researchers and talent to progress to the highest levels, but it will also raise awareness and create allyship from our existing research leadership. So, you know, there's a whole host of different programs, and I'd be happy to talk to anyone about this. And look out for the National Inclusive Research Conference that will be coming online in the spring of 2023. You'll all be very welcome to join us. So I just want to really start to focus in on you now and encourage you to take EDI to your hearts and embed it into your practice. And I think, you know, we've all and are still living through a global pandemic. And with that and the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, it really has shone a spotlight on inequalities in our society and in our organisations and within our sector. And we are at a tipping point. And for me, as someone who's leading on equality, diversity and inclusion, you know, we potentially could reverse some of the equalities progress that we've made, for example, around gender equality. You know, the pandemic really has hit women and carers very hard. Many of you will have been struggling to conduct your research as well as juggle family, homeschooling, etc. And there are people leaving the profession, and we need to make sure that we don't start to lose the diversity that we've worked so hard to achieve, particularly around gender equality. So I want to encourage you to be inclusive leaders and really stress that you have a key role to play. Think about the people that you're working with and collaborating with and reading the papers of, and then start to appreciate everybody's contribution and be inspirational to diverse people and encourage them to get involved, and especially people at risk from being excluded. And again, not going to go into any great detail, but if you want to think about your own professional development as inclusive leaders, there's a wonderful model by Deloitte, which talks about the 6 C's of inclusive leadership. So, you know, commit to being an ally. You know, you might not be a woman, you might not be from a minority and protected group, but buy into the diversity dividend and the benefits that it will bring to your research quality and impact. And, you know, get involved as an ally within your organisation and within your discipline and challenge bias, both subtle and overt when you see it. Also, you know, maybe you would like to take some training, some sessions around and increase your cognizance of your own bias, which we all have. You know, ingrained from our experiences in our childhood and our societal backgrounds, and recognize the privilege that you may have, and start to think about your organization and potentially why it's easier for some people to access higher education, what you can then do to encourage diversity of access and participation, and also then once in, how you can really encourage people to progress and move forward as well as yourselves. And also have the courage to speak out. So I follow Jeremy Farrar, who is the director of the Wellcome Trust. He's on the SAGE government committee advising in terms of COVID response. And he's been very vocal about the need for equality in terms of the COVID vaccine distribution, and particularly to developing countries. But he's also been very vocal about research culture in the UK. And, Wellcome have really led in terms of a call for culture change, and they have inclusivity as a priority for their organisation. And recognising that the culture and system is not working for a lot of us, and we have the power to change it. We can challenge the status quo, and so don't be afraid to call out deeply held and ingrained beliefs about what a successful engineer looks like, or what a successful researcher looks like, for example. So I'm just going to leave you with a slide really on actions you might want to take to be a really successful researcher, build on your already amazing achievements, and embrace equality, diversity and inclusion. So, raise your awareness of stereotypes that you have. Lovely video that I've given you a link to from the Royal Society about how you can slow down your decision making and be more aware of assumptions that you make in your decision making process. Build and expand on your networks and bring excluded people in, and look to work with multidisciplinary and diverse collaborators. Volunteer, get out there into the communities and encourage them into your disciplines and share your research. And as I say, be courageous and promote your own ideas and challenge the current culture. So I'm going to stop there and open up for questions.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for a really thought-provoking talk and for challenging us to stand up for this. It's really important. I've already downloaded the Invisible Woman book on Audible.
Brilliant, that's great. It's a good read, it's an easy read as well.
So we have one question, which I think you've partially answered, but Peter asks or says that he sees that Blacks are seriously underrepresented in UK academia, and what is University of Manchester doing to improve the proportion of Blacks? So I think you've answered that partially, but is there anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, we have a whole action plan, Race Matters action plan, which is specifically about addressing the underrepresentation of Black staff and students, and also the attainment gap for students, which I haven't had a chance to talk about, even once in terms of widening participation. That sense of belonging isn't there. They don't see people like them within the academic workforce, and so we have a whole host of different actions right across student and staff support. So I can share that link actually, so you have more specifics there.
That would be great, thank you. Is there anything wider than Manchester that you think the UK community should be doing, that sort of as a call to arms to academia in the UK?
Well, I think having this sort of event as part of a research conference is really amazing. As a cancer researcher, there was going to national and international conference, there was nothing like this. It wasn't in the conversation. No one was connected with the data. People wouldn't even know about the inequalities in the peer review process or in grant funding. And once you know that, you can't unknow it. And each and every one of you on this Zoom today, you'll be on panels, you'll be on recruitment panels and grant panels, and you'll see poor practice play out. And, it can be really hard in that setting, especially with senior people with more perceived authority, to actually call those things out. But, have the courage. The sector is behind you. The sector wants change. People like Jeremy Farrar want change. Ottilie and Liza, who's the director of UKRI, she's called for change as well, and to move away from that narrow view of excellence. So I think there's lots of talk, but now we need more action, and we need collective action.
Thank you. If anyone else has any other questions, we've got time for a couple more. I have a quick question. Oh, it might not be a quick question, but what I hope. So we obviously see this drop off at post PhD, early postdoc level that sort of persists then through the rest of academia. But do you think that we should be having more programs in schools and sort of getting in early? Or do you think there needs to be a change in the way that postdoc careers and postdoc funding, because there's a lot of uncertainty and difficulty at that level?
Yeah, I mean, that's really how I got heavily involved in EDI, because I was a research developer and working with lots of talented early career researchers, and then seeing many of them being unsupported and unable to progress their own ideas and progress their careers, and then being lost to the sector. Many of them went on to have wonderful careers outside in other areas, but just seeing this bias start to creep in and then think, well, actually, this isn't right. We need to start to address this. So I think there are more issues at play in terms of, and that's why I'm really keen and have focused much of my gender equality work around culture change, not just for women, but for all protected groups, to bring more diversity into the workforce. So it is a, you know, we've got a culture that's not working for many people, as I said in the talk, and you know, we should be brave enough to change it.
Well, hopefully events like this and talks like yours can start getting the message out wider, and once everyone's behind it, there can't help but be change.
Brilliant.
Well, as no further questions have come in, I will thank you very much, Rebecca, for such, sorry, Rachel, I called you Rebecca.
No problem, everyone does.
Top on my screen and Rachel at the bottom, so I was looking at the wrong point. Thank you very much for a really, really fascinating talk. I'm glad that you've allowed us to record it and we can share it for people who couldn't be here today to watch as well, because it's really, really vital that we get this message across. So thank you very much. Our next talk starts at, let me just make sure I've got this right, 1:40, so 13:40. So if you could join us again then for our next talk, everyone online. And we have a talk from Dr. Rebecca Mellon from Cardiff. So it is Rebecca after lunch. So thank you very much. I'll stop the recording.